The millionaire's impromptu decision to surprise his daughter with lunch at school took a dark turn he never anticipated. The scene that played out in the school cafeteria that day clung to him like a specter for months afterward. Settle in, take a deep breath, and let me recount this disquieting tale, one I sincerely hope will usher you into a peaceful slumber. Richard Coleman resided in an ostentatious estate on the city's periphery, a residence so impeccably ordered it bordered on sterile. His mornings began before the crack of dawn, and he seldom returned home before the streetlights cast long, skeletal shadows on his doorstep. Dinner was often a solitary affair, a reheated meal courtesy of Mrs. Turner, their housekeeper of 10 years. At the expansive dining table, Lily, his 8-year-old daughter, had her own designated seat with a gleaming set of silverware, yet it remained untouched most evenings. Lily was a withdrawn child, often found by the window, sketching the sprawling backyard garden with a worn-down pencil. Mrs. Turner doted on Lily, treating her like her own granddaughter, often coaxing her to play outside or offering warm milk. Lily would simply shake her head, saying she was waiting for her father. Richard, while undoubtedly loving his daughter, believed that providing her with the best education and material comforts sufficed. He termed it love through responsibility. During the rare parent-teacher conferences he attended, Richard met Madeline Brooks, Lily's homeroom teacher, a woman in her early 30s. Her gentle eyes and thoughtful demeanor left a lasting impression. Madeline noted that Lily was bright but shy and could benefit from more paternal attention. Richard felt a pang of unease, realizing how little he knew of his daughter's life at school, her favorite foods, her friends, her daily experiences. Days later, Madeline sent a thank-you note, reiterating Lily's artistic talent. Subsequent emails offered brief updates, sometimes including photos of Lily in group projects or art club. Her writing style was reassuring, as if he had an ally in caring for his child. Richard began to take greater notice of Madeline. Madeline's first visit to the house occurred when Lily was feeling unwell. She brought homemade toast and honey, explaining that Lily often ate little at school. Richard was grateful, while Mrs. Turner stood by the kitchen door, her gaze heavy with unspoken thoughts. After that, Madeline visited more frequently Lily's birthday school art exhibits. She possessed a delicate touch, showing enough care without overstepping boundaries, a balance that put Richard at ease. One afternoon, as Lily colored, Madeline sat beside her, gently suggesting that the child needed a maternal figure. Richard heard her words, and a long silence filled the room. He knew she was right. Their house was orderly but devoid of warmth. Soon, their meetings became more regular: coffee shops, school, brief encounters at the gate. Each time, Madeline left Richard feeling comforted, believing he could have a fresh start. Mrs. Turner noticed the change. She didn't voice her concerns but watched Madeline with a keen eye. Once, when Madeline held Lily's hand, Mrs. Turner noticed the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She reported this to Richard, but he dismissed her as overly skeptical, insisting that Madeline was a good person who genuinely cared for Lily. The housekeeper didn't argue. She just quietly poured tea. A few months later, the headlines blared, "Millionaire Coleman finds new happiness." The wedding was a small, intimate affair with close relatives and colleagues. Madeline walked down the aisle in a pristine white dress, with Lily, in a matching dress, by her side, though the girl's face was pale. When reporters asked for his thoughts, Richard simply said, "I'm lucky to have met someone who understands me and cares for my daughter." That night, after the guests had departed, the mansion's lights remained on. Mrs. Turner cleared the remnants of the banquet, the clinking of china plates echoing softly. Lily stood by the second-floor railing, holding her unfinished sketch, a portrait of her late mother, smiling gently. After a moment's hesitation, she folded the drawing, placed it in her desk drawer, and replaced it with her father's new wedding photo. Her gaze was melancholic, but no one noticed. Downstairs, Richard poured wine for Madeline, praising her domestic skills and thoughtfulness. Madeline simply smiled, glancing at the large framed photo hanging in the center of the room, a picture of Richard's first wife holding a young Lily. For a moment, Madeline's smile stiffened, then faded when Richard went upstairs. Alone in the empty kitchen, she opened a cupboard, took down an old picture frame, wiped the dust off the glass, and placed it deep inside a cabinet where no one would see it. Her hand paused for a few seconds, her eyes significantly colder than her usual gentle demeanor. Behind her, the living room clock ticked steadily, each dry beat like a countdown to something unknown. The house now held 3 people, yet the atmosphere felt heavier than before. Lily lay in her room, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Downstairs, Madeline locked the cabinet and stepped out onto the balcony, the streetlights casting a sharp line of shadow that divided her face into light and dark. In that silence, the house seemed to begin changing, so subtly that no one noticed, but surely and truly. Richard lay in bed, exhausted but content, believing he had done the right thing. He thought about the future, about Lily having someone to care for her, about the dinner table being filled with laughter. But below, in the corner of the kitchen where the old photo had just been hidden, a flicker of light from a lamp dimmed, then went out completely. As Lily gently turned in her blanket, a single tear slipped from the corner of her eye, landing on the unfinished page on her study desk, a tiny, wobbly inscription she had penned. "I miss you, Mom." In the first few days after the wedding, the house felt infused with new life. Madeline rearranged the living room, changed the curtains, and opted for brighter duvet colors. Richard felt a sense of ease returning home after work, seeing the neatly set dinner table and the soft smile on his new wife's face. He believed everything was heading in the right direction. Lily had a caretaker, and he regained the feeling of having a complete home. Madeline woke up earlier than Mrs. Turner, often leaving a note on the table. "I'll pick up Lily today. You don't need to worry about work." In the evenings, she prepared proper meals, asking her husband about his workday. Everything proceeded so smoothly that Richard was convinced his wife was genuinely born to mend the gaps left by time. But beneath that surface, things began to shift. Lily attended school regularly, dressed neatly in her uniform, and smiled when her father said good morning, yet the smile never reached her eyes. Mrs. Turner noticed it first. Whenever Madeline drove up, Lily would shrink back, quickly buttoning her coat and clutching her school bag straps tightly, as if preparing for something she feared. At school, Madeline was highly respected. She knew how to engage parents and deftly pleased the principal. She often told Richard that Lily needed more discipline, not through scolding but through strict control and rigor. He believed her. To him, discipline was the cornerstone of success, so he had no doubts. Mrs. Turner began to notice Lily was eating less. She would merely touch her spoon to the food a few times before setting it down. When asked, the girl would shake her head, saying she was tired. Some mornings, the housekeeper found her sitting in the kitchen very early, clutching her stomach and sighing softly. One evening, Lily whispered, "If I don't finish my food at school, the teacher will get upset." Mrs. Turner felt a chill, but when she related this to Richard, Madeline simply smiled and called it a way to help her overcome laziness. He chuckled, feeling reassured that his wife knew how to raise a child. As time passed, the subtle clues accumulated. Lily often stayed up late studying, her eyes dark-rimmed, her small hands trembling as she held her pencil. She would check her backpack multiple times before leaving for school, as if afraid of forgetting something crucial. One day, Mrs. Turner found small slips of paper in Lily's desk. Messages like, "Don't tell anyone," "Be good," and "Don't make Dad sad." The housekeeper didn't know who wrote them, but the handwriting wasn't Lily's. One morning, Richard rushed off for a business trip. He gave Lily a quick kiss and told Madeline to pick her up late because of a meeting. After he left, Lily sat silently by the window, watching the car drive out of the gate, while Madeline quietly closed the curtains, her voice soft yet sharp. "Go to your room and change now." No one else in the house heard the words. In the days that followed, Mrs. Turner observed that Madeline always picked Lily up early, sometimes even before school was out. When questioned, Madeline explained it was private support sessions for emotionally struggling students. Mrs. Turner felt uneasy but had no grounds to interfere with school matters. Then, Lily started having trouble sleeping. She would wake up in the middle of the night, eyes wide with panic, her hair damp with cold sweat. Mrs. Turner held her, listening to her labored breathing. Lily could only manage a few words. "Teacher, punishment me?" before falling silent again. Mrs. Turner considered calling Richard, but he was abroad at the time, his schedule packed with meetings, and his secretary informed her that he was unavailable for calls. Madeline knew this well. She gradually took control of everything: mealtimes, study hours, and even who Lily talked to in class. She isolated the girl from her peers, saying Lily needed to focus and concentrate. At home, she required Lily to write a nightly journal of things to fix, which she had to read aloud before dinner. Lily complied obediently, but her hands always shook when she wrote. Other educators noticed Madeline's specialized interest in Lily, but because she had the principal's trust, no one dared to ask questions. A few children in the class mentioned that Lily is often kept behind during lunch, but their words were quickly dismissed. One morning, Mrs. Turner entered the kitchen early and found Lily curled up under the table, her face pale. She whispered, almost breathless, "I don't want to go to school." Mrs. Turner was about to ask more when the sound of a car horn blared outside the gate. Madeline had arrived. The door opened, the sound of high heels clicking steadily on the tile floor. Her perfume permeated the kitchen. Lily tightened her grip on her backpack straps, eyes fixed on the door. Mrs. Turner gently placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, but Lily remained rigid, frozen solid. Madeline stepped in, smiling lightly. "Are you two ready?" She glanced at Lily, then turned to Mrs. Turner. "I'll take the girl. You don't need to worry." Lily nodded, but her eyes were filled with panic. As Madeline took her hand, Mrs. Turner felt a cold dread run down her spine, even though Madeline's smile was as gentle as always. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating the polished floor. Richard stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie, turning around to see Lily seated on a chair, head bowed, tying her shoelaces. He walked over, intending to kiss her forehead as usual, but she suddenly leaned away, pretending to retie a loose knot. He paused momentarily, then offered a strained smile, thinking she was just sleepy. When he asked Madeline, she replied softly, "She's going through a withdrawn phase. I'll help her overcome it. Just let things proceed naturally." The explanation sounded plausible, so he accepted it. Madeline knew how to make everything she said seem credible, and Richard, caught up in the whirlwind of his work, had no time left for doubt. Mrs. Turner thought differently. She observed Lily becoming quieter, eating less, sometimes staring blankly into space. She reported this to Richard, but he merely nodded dismissively, then rushed away from the table when his phone rang. "I'll talk to Madeline about it later," he said without looking back. In his office, Richard received an email from Madeline, sent to the principal and copied to him. She reported on the class's academic progress and praised Lily's improvement, attaching a photo of the girl participating in group activities. He opened the picture, seeing his daughter sitting in the corner of the classroom, head bowed low, looking exhausted, but he didn't register this. He only felt proud that his daughter had been mentioned. That evening, he called his wife to thank her, saying how lucky he was to have her by his side. On the other end of the line, Madeline smiled, while Lily sat in her room, writing an apology note for eating too slowly and dropping rice on the floor. The next morning, Lily refused breakfast. She clutched her stomach, whispering to Mrs. Turner that her tummy hurt. The housekeeper worried, suggesting she stay home, but Madeline, having just walked downstairs, immediately objected. "Children often make excuses to skip school. I don't want Lily to develop that habit." Mrs. Turner started to protest, but Madeline's gaze silenced her. In the end, Lily had to get into the car, her face pale. As the car pulled away, Mrs. Turner stood watching, her heart heavy with dread. She picked up the phone, intending to call Richard, but then put it down. She knew he was in a meeting, and even if she called, she'd likely receive the cold response, "I'll talk to Madeline later." At school, Madeline's authority became increasingly evident. She often used the title special student manager to isolate Lily from the class. During lunch, she told the cafeteria staff that the girl needed nutritional supervision. No one dared to object because Madeline had the principal's trust. Her words were law. That day, a new employee witnessed Madeline scooping leftover food from an old pot and dumping it onto Lily's tray. When the girl stood still, eyes wide, Madeline simply said, "Eat it. Here, every child must learn to be grateful." The employee thought about reporting it, but a colleague pulled her aside, whispering, "Don't get involved. Miss Brooks has connections with the administration. It's safer to be careful." In the afternoon, Lily came home earlier than usual. She went straight to her room without a word. Mrs. Turner brought up a bowl of soup, finding the girl lying face toward the wall. "Eat something, dear," she said gently. Lily shook her head. The housekeeper placed her hand on the girl's forehead, feeling cold sweat dampening her hair. She sat beside the bed, deeply troubled but unable to do anything else. Late that evening, when Richard returned home, Mrs. Turner met him in the hall, explaining that Lily had persistent stomach pain and was afraid of going to school. He frowned briefly, but before he could speak, Madeline emerged from the living room, holding a cup of tea. "She was fine at school," she said. "She might be pretending to get a day off. Kids do that a lot." Richard glanced at his watch. He had a call scheduled with a European partner. "I'll talk to her later," he replied, heading straight into his study. Mrs. Turner stood still, feeling as if she had spoken into a void. Night descended, and the house fell silent. Lily woke up suddenly, gripped by sharp cramping pain. She got out of bed, her bare feet touching the cold floor of the hallway. The light from the living room was barely enough to illuminate her small, trembling shoulders. She whispered, "Dad?" But only the sound of wind through the door crack replied. She stood still for a moment, then returned to her room, pulling the blanket over her head, trying to stifle her sobs so no one would hear. The lights remained on downstairs. In his study, Richard sat in front of his laptop, his face buried in numbers. In another corner of the house, Madeline locked the kitchen door, glancing upstairs, her eyes holding a strange expression, as if she were keeping a secret. And on the upper floor, a child lay awake in silence, waiting for someone to come, but no one came. As time went on, Lily's changes could no longer be hidden. The clothes that once fit snugly were now loose. Her sleeves almost covered her thin hands. Her cheeks once round were now hollow, her skin pale and lifeless. Mrs. Turner was the first to realize it. She no longer saw Lily smiling at breakfast, nor heard the hurried footsteps running down the stairs when her father came home every evening. While clearing the table, she saw Lily sitting silently, staring at her bowl, the spoon resting untouched in her hand. When prompted, the girl would softly reply, "I'm not hungry," and sit still until Madeline told her, "That's enough, go upstairs and study." At that moment, she would stand up, bow her head, and rush away as if afraid of being called back. Richard also noticed the difference, but he didn't know where to start. When he asked Madeline, she told him, "Lily is going through a transitional phase. Children this age are sensitive, change is normal." Her gentle, rational tone somewhat reassured him. Madeline always knew how to make everything sound reasonable, and Richard, as busy as ever, didn't question her further. One morning, as he was about to leave the house, Richard caught Madeline inspecting Lily's lunchbox. She opened the lid, used a spoon to scoop out some of the egg and vegetables into a bowl, and put it in the fridge. He looked at her for a few seconds, about to ask, when she turned back, smiling. "It's easier for her to digest if she eats less. Don't worry, I know best." Richard smiled and nodded. He still didn't understand that sometimes someone else's smile is just a way to hide what he didn't want to see. At school, the whispers started to spread. A cafeteria worker mentioned that she had often seen Miss Brooks, Madeline, asking for the previous day's leftovers to be kept for Lily. Sometimes, she even made the girl eat the cold remnants because waste is not allowed. When asked, she simply said it was discipline training. Other teachers heard this, but everyone avoided the topic, as Madeline was favored by the principal and was the wife of a major school donor. Lily became increasingly withdrawn in class. She spoke little and no longer participated in drawing as before. The unfinished sketch of her mother, the drawing she once cherished, was now hidden in her desk drawer, covered with a thin layer of dust. She sat at the back of the class, her gaze always directed downward, her hands clasped together beneath the table. One day, Emily, her desk mate, offered Lily a small cookie, softly asking, "Aren't you having lunch?" Before Lily could answer, Madeline appeared right behind them. She placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, her voice even. "The girl needs discipline. No one helps her with impulsive kindness, Emily." The whole class fell silent. From then on, no one dared to ask anything more. Night came and the house was quiet. Lily often woke up midway through the night, clutching her stomach. Stepping onto the balcony, the pain made her tremble. Mrs. Turner, hearing the soft sounds from the opposite room, put on her robe and went out. Lily sat huddled on the steps, her bare feet touching the cold tile. Without asking, the housekeeper just placed a cup of warm water nearby. The girl softly said, "I'm fine," then rested her head on her knees, staring wide-eyed into the dark. Mrs. Turner sat quietly beside her, her heart aching, but she didn't know what else to do. When Richard returned from his long business trip, he finally noticed his daughter was noticeably frail. He decided to take her to the doctor, but Madeline objected. "She's just tired from studying too much. Taking her to the doctor now will make her think she's sick, which isn't good for her mentally." He hesitated, then backed down. That evening, the family ate dinner together. Madeline had made a pumpkin cream soup, lightly scented with butter. Lily only took a few spoonfuls, then set the spoon down. Just as Richard was about to ask, the girl suddenly bent forward and expelled a little of the soup. Mrs. Turner quickly stood up, but Madeline was faster, grabbing a tissue and cleaning the table. "It's nothing. Perhaps she ate too quickly," she said gently, leading Lily upstairs. Richard stood up, clearly bewildered. He turned to Mrs. Turner. "I don't understand. The girl looks exhausted." She was about to tell him what she observed, but Madeline returned, placed a hand on his shoulder, and spoke calmly. "Don't worry. Just let her rest early. Don't stress her out more." Richard nodded, saying nothing more. When Lily was put to bed, Mrs. Turner followed, seeing the girl lying on her side, hands clenched tightly to the edge of the blanket. Her lips moved but made no sound. The housekeeper stroked her hair, feeling the cold sweat soaking her hand. She gently pulled her hand away, softly saying, "Just sleep. You'll feel better in the morning." In the hallway, Richard looked through the crack of the door, seeing Madeline adjusting the blanket for his daughter. He felt a warmth in his heart, as if she truly cared. He didn't know that right after he left, her smile vanished, leaving only an empty stare. After dinner, Richard went out onto the balcony, making a call to a business partner. The light from the phone illuminated his face, making the dark circles under his eyes even more apparent. A fleeting thought of Lily's strange look crossed his mind, but the incoming call tone quickly dissolved the thought. Work pulled him away as always. Downstairs, the kitchen light was on. Madeline washed the dishes, each movement deliberate. When she heard the sound of the study door closing, she dried her hands and walked into the hallway. The night light in Lily's room cast a dim yellow glow. She paused before the door, listening. Inside, Lily breathed softly, her sleep fitful. The door creaked open. The sound of the hinge was light enough for a cold draft to seep in. Madeline stepped in, her shadow stretching long across the floor, gliding past the small chair and stopping by the bed. She leaned down, looking at the pale face of the sleeping child. After a moment, she tucked the blanket in, her eyes pausing at the small photo on the nightstand. A picture of Lily with her birth mother. She picked up the photo, stared at it for a long time, then placed it back face down. After that, she adjusted the night light and left the room, closing the door softly. The house fell into silence. Richard was still talking. On the balcony, Richard spoke on the phone, his voice betraying none of the turmoil brewing within. Inside, behind closed doors, Mrs. Turner shifted in her bed, unable to find solace from the disquieting whispers of the wind against the glass. Upstairs, Lily, disturbed from sleep, opened her eyes to the encroaching darkness. Reaching from under the covers, her small fingers sought the solace of a familiar image, a photograph laid face down. She flipped it over, and in the dim light filtering through the curtains, her mother's face emerged, bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. "I miss you, Mom," she breathed, the words barely audible. Later, in the dead of night, a faint sound jolted Mrs. Turner awake. A mother's instinct, sharp and immediate, flooded her with unease. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slipped into the hallway, drawn to the sliver of light spilling from beneath Lily's slightly ajar door. Peeking through the crack, she saw Madeline bending over Lily's bed, the two figures merging into a single, strangely silent shadow. She stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe, until the soft creak of the hinge echoed in the stillness, and Madeline emerged, closing the door with a gentleness that seemed eerily out of place. The following morning, Lily awoke listless and pale, her face carrying a disturbing ashen hue. A yellowish stain, like spilled broth, marred the collar of her shirt. She sat silently at the breakfast table, her small hands clutching a spoon, the food untouched before her. "Lily, are you all right, dear?" Mrs. Turner asked softly, her concern evident. But Lily only looked down, offering no reply. Richard entered the room, immediately noticing his daughter's weariness. Before he could voice his concern, Madeline intercepted, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "She just had a nightmare, darling," I comforted her. "I didn't want to worry you," she said, her practiced smile firmly in place. Richard paused, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. Mrs. Turner watched the exchange, her throat tight with unspoken anxieties, and retreated into the kitchen. After breakfast, Richard drove to the office, but found his mind a battlefield of conflicting thoughts. Mrs. Turner's hushed warning echoed in his head. Asterisk, she shouldn't be in the girl's room at night. Asterisk, the more he dwelled on it, the more unsettled he became. The image of Madeline sitting by his daughter's bed, that unervingly gentle smile, should have reassured him, but instead, it sent a chill creeping down his spine. Mid-meeting, he found himself unconsciously reaching for his phone, scrolling through pictures of Lily. The most recent one was from 2 months ago, a picture of Lily still smiling, and the sudden realization struck him. It had been far too long since he'd seen that genuine joy on her face. He abruptly excused himself, his mind made up. He called the family doctor, scheduling a full checkup for Lily. "What are her symptoms?" the doctor inquired. "She's been weak lately? Can't sleep? Eating less," he replied vaguely, his voice trembling slightly. After hanging up, he took a deep breath, forcing himself to believe that he was overreacting, that he needed to discuss this with Madeline that evening. But when he got home, the words caught in his throat. As soon as he mentioned the doctor's appointment, Madeline froze momentarily, her facade of calm cracking ever so slightly. "I don't think that's necessary, honey," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "She's just studying too hard. Taking her to the doctor now will only make her think she's ill." The statement, though delivered softly, carried an undeniable firmness. He nodded, trying to convince himself she was probably right, that he was being overly anxious. As he went up to his study, Mrs. Turner intercepted him, holding out an envelope. "You should see this," she whispered. Inside was a small, crumpled piece of paper, scribbled with childish handwriting. Asterisk, "My tummy hurts often, but the teacher said not to tell." Richard stared at the simple words, his chest tightening, his breathing becoming labored. "Where did you find this?" he finally managed to ask. "In her desk drawer," she replied. "I thought you needed to know." He said nothing more. When Mrs. Turner left, he remained seated, his eyes fixed on the paper. Each word seemed etched into his mind. Lily's face, pale, silent, and fearful, flashed through his thoughts. A sense of dread, the strongest he had ever felt, washed over him. The next day, he arrived at the school early, using the excuse of meeting with the principal to discuss funding for the gifted program. After the conversation concluded, he requested permission to walk around the campus. As if by chance, he found himself passing the cafeteria area. Through the glass window, he saw Madeline talking to a group of canteen staff. She handed them a piece of paper, her expression unreadable. When Richard appeared, none of them looked at him, their gazes fixed on the floor, avoiding eye contact. The sight made his unease intensify. When Madeline turned around, she seemed startled, but quickly recovered, plastering a smile on her face as if nothing were amiss. "You're here early?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I thought I'd stop by," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm just giving instructions for the special needs student menu," she said, adjusting her collar. "Lily still needs supervision, you know." He nodded, his eyes following the employees as they hurried into the back kitchen, as if fleeing from something. Leaving the school, he sat in his car for a long time, his hands gripping the steering wheel, the engine silent. The wind rustled the leaves, tapping against the car window. In his mind, fragmented memories began to coalesce. Mrs. Turner's complaints, the stain on his daughter's shirt, Madeline's evasiveness, the crumpled note with the naive handwriting. Everything began to fit together, forming an image that made his heart race. He dialed his personal assistant, his voice hoarse. "Cancel everything for the next 2 days. No visitors, no meetings." "Yes, sir," the other end replied, but he had already hung up. The car moved slowly back toward the school. He couldn't hear the engine anymore, only the frantic pounding in his chest. When the car stopped at the gate, he turned off the ignition and rolled down the window. The afternoon breeze carried the smell of communal cooking from the kitchen area. Through the trees, he saw Madeline just entering the cafeteria, carrying a food tray. On the tray was a small portion of plain rice with a little cloudy soup. She walked slowly, stopping at the corner table where Lily sat alone. Richard sat motionless, his eyes glued to the scene. The feeling of dread was no longer a vague intuition. It was clear, sharp, like an invisible hand tightening around his heart. He didn't know what he would do next, but he knew that from this moment on, he would no longer trust blindly. Inside the car, the clock showed almost noon. He opened the door and stepped out, clutching the keys so tightly that the metal imprinted on his skin. The school gate was slightly ajar. In the distance, Madeline leaned over the food tray, the light catching her face, highlighting a smile Richard had never seen before, a smile that sent shivers down his spine. He stood still, looking through the glass, seeing his small daughter's eyes, pale, silent, struggling to swallow each spoonful of the murky soup. A leaf dropped onto the car hood, light yet heavy in that instant. Richard knew that his doubts were solidifying into a terrible truth. Richard stepped out of the car, his hand squeezing the phone in his pocket. He walked straight toward the principal's office, maintaining his usual calm composure. "I'd like to surprise my daughter and join her for lunch," he stated, his voice soft but firm. The principal, entirely unaware of the unusual request, smiled and eagerly instructed someone to lead him to the cafeteria. The path led through a long corridor, its walls decorated with children's artwork, but to Richard's eyes, everything seemed shrouded in a dull haze. As he got closer, his steps slowed, the atmosphere feeling wrong, an awkward stillness permeating the air. The clatter of cutlery on trays was sporadic, small fragments of conversation swallowed by the emptiness. He stopped outside the large glass window, the light reflecting off his taut face. At the end of the room, Lily sat alone at an isolated table. She looked almost swallowed by the vast space. Before her was a silver plastic tray containing only cold, plain rice and a bit of murky broth with shreds of vegetables floating on top. By the serving counter, Madeline held a stainless steel ladle, her face calm as if performing a routine duty, but her actions drew hushed attention. She scooped up a portion of cold, leftover food from another student's tray and dumped it directly onto Lily's. The liquid splashed, hitting the child's wrist. Lily flinched slightly but dared not cry out. Madeline said something, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she turned and walked away, her posture rigid as a taut wire. Lily lowered her head, her hands clenched on the table edge, her shoulders trembling slightly as if trying to stifle a reaction. At a nearby table, a little girl started to stand up, but a cafeteria worker signaled her to keep silent. The entire room was gripped by a suffocating stillness. Richard stood motionless outside the door, his heart slamming against his ribs. Everything before him seemed to slow down. He opened the door and walked in, the sound of his shoes on the floor echoing like a series of hammer blows. All the students turned their heads. Madeline started the fake smile that had been forming instantly fading. He walked straight toward his daughter, each step feeling heavier, his eyes never leaving the food tray that smelled faintly of cold remnants. He stopped in front of Lily and swept the tray aside. The sound of metal hitting the table made everyone jump. No one dared to breathe. Lily looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, her lower lashes wet. When she saw her father, she trembled slightly. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. Richard bent down, scooped her up, his arms tightening around her as if to shield her from the entire world. A group of teachers approached, confused about what to do. Richard didn't utter a word, his gaze cold, sharp, and controlled. He turned to the trembling canteen worker holding the ladle, signaling with his eyes. Asterisk, don't touch anything. Asterisk, the woman understood instantly and quietly nodded. Madeline tried to maintain her composure. She walked over, forcing a strained smile. You misunderstand. This is just a disciplinary meal. The girl needs to learn to appreciate food. No one believed her, even the students in the room looked down, afraid to watch. A cafeteria worker clutched the edge of her apron, her eyes tearing up. The air was thick, heavy as if about to break. The principal appeared breathless after receiving the news. He looked at the scene, Lily in her father's arms, the scattered food tray, Madeline standing frozen, and found himself speechless. What is going on? He asked, his voice choked. No one answered. A student at the back table suddenly took out a phone and captured the scene. The quiet click echoed in the silence, startling Madeline into turning around. Richard held his daughter close, feeling her weak heartbeat against his chest. He looked around, his gaze sweeping across every face, from the canteen workers to the students to the principal. No one dared to meet his eyes. Everything spoke volumes about the truth he had ignored for so long. He turned to Madeline, his voice low but precise. You are not to go near her again. Madeline stood stiffly, her face momentarily distorted. You are misunderstanding, she tried to argue, but Richard had already turned his back, carrying Lily through the long corridor, his footsteps measured and decisive, followed by the heavy breaths of the witnesses. Other teachers moved aside. No one dared to interfere. The scene felt like a boundary being drawn between justice and the concealed truth. Stepping out of the cafeteria area, a strong gust of wind swept through the hallway, lightly fluttering Lily's jacket. Richard held his daughter tighter. She buried her head in his shoulder, her breathing ragged. He felt her body was icy cold. Inside, the principal turned to Madeline, his eyes filled with astonishment. Explain yourself. What is happening? Madeline offered a faint laugh, trying to regain her calm. I was only teaching the child to be grateful. By doing that, a canteen worker blurted out, the voice echoing in the room making everyone jump. Madeline whirled around, her look fiercely cold. But this time no one lowered their gaze. Richard walked out of the building, his breathing still unsteady. He placed Lily in the back seat of the car, carefully securing the seatbelt, then leaned in to look at her. It's okay. You're safe now. Lily didn't speak. She just gripped his sleeve tightly, silent tears streaming down her face. He looked up, catching sight of Madeline standing at the cafeteria doorway through the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, her lips tightly sealed, her eyes a mix of panic and defiance. The wind tousled her hair, messing up her carefully constructed smile. Richard opened the car door and got into the driver's seat. His phone vibrated softly in his hand. He looked down. The screen displayed a video recording of the entire scene in the cafeteria. Someone had sent him a copy. He hit the save button without a word. The engine started and the car slowly began to move. In the rear-view mirror, Madeline's figure shrunk until she was just a blurry shape in the doorway. Lily huddled against her father, her body shuddering with small, suppressed sobs. Richard reached back and gently patted her back, feeling her chaotic heartbeat in his palm. He looked straight ahead, the road stretching into the distance. In his mind, all the fragments of memory converged. The cold meals, the deceptively gentle words, the smooth smile, all now became vivid evidence of the cruel truth he had ignored for too long. He pulled over near the entrance gate and turned off the engine, sitting still. The silence in the car was so profound he could hear Lily's soft breathing. He opened his phone, watching the video one more time. Each frame was a stab to a father's dignity. When he put the phone away, his hands were still shaking. He knew that from this moment everything had changed, not just his relationship with the wife he had trusted, but his own identity, the man who had been too blind to see what was happening right before his eyes. Outside the car, the wind picked up violently, flapping the sign that read *Student Canteen, where students are loved. The words rattled mockingly in the wind, a bitter irony for everything that had just occurred. Richard took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel again. Behind him, Lily let out a small sob, then leaned back against the seat. He turned around, gently touched her hair, and whispered, "Dad's here now. You don't have to be afraid anymore." As the car door closed, only the sound of the wind whistling through the trees remained, mingling with the heartbeats of two people. A child who had just escaped the darkness, and a father who had just awakened from his self-imposed blindness. The car sped away in silence. The wind rushed past the window carrying the heavy breaths Richard struggled to contain. His hands clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles white. In the passenger seat, Lily sat huddled, her knees drawn up close to her body. She stared out the window, her eyes hollow. Richard briefly glanced at his daughter. The sunlight highlighted her small face, exposing her pale skin and dry lips. A sharp pain pierced his heart, and only when he saw her shoulders tremble did he realize she was trying to stifle her crying. He reached out, but his hands stopped midair, as if he didn't know how to offer comfort. He didn't speak until the car stopped in front of the hospital. Lily walked obediently beside him, her small frame swallowed by her oversized jacket. In the examination room, the medical team worked quietly. When the results were placed on the table, the doctor sighed, speaking slowly. "The girl is severely malnourished, has stomach ulcers due to prolonged stress, and shows signs of sleep disorder. You need to ask if anything at home or school made her fearful." Richard remained silent. Lily sat on the examination bed, her hands fiddling with the edge of the blanket. When she heard the doctor's question, she slightly shook her head, then turned her face away. That tiny movement felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He understood that every word Madeline had spoken was a lie. In the waiting room, the air was thick. Richard leaned back against the chair, his eyes fixed on the window glass that reflected his own haggard face. On the bed, Lily lay on her side, her small hand still gripping the corner of the blanket. Every time a nurse walked in, she would startle, then pretend to sleep. The sight choked him up. When the nurse left, he gently leaned down and stroked her soft hair, which was stiff with cold sweat. Her breathing was steady but labored. "Dad's here," he whispered, but his voice cracked midway. He realized he had never truly been present for her, never listened to her stories, never noticed the fear in her eyes. The image of Madeline smiling, her voice sweetly saying, "She is very well behaved at school," emerged like an indelible stain. He remembered the times Mrs. Turner tried to say something only for him to dismiss her with *, "You worry too much." Now all those memory fragments piled up heavy as a stone block on his chest. He opened his phone, retrieving the video from the cafeteria, the image of Madeline standing over the food tray, scooping leftovers onto Lily's tray, her hands stiff as a machine, and his daughter head bowed, silently enduring it. He watched until the very last second, his hand trembling, then tears spilled onto the screen. Without hesitation, he dialed his private lawyer, sending the video along with a brief message. "I want this handled immediately. It must not be buried like other cases." On the other end, the lawyer simply replied, I understand, sir. I'll be at your house tonight. He turned to Mrs. Turner, who was standing at the door, her face etched with worry. Please stay and look after her. I need to go back to the school. What about Madeline, sir? Richard looked up, his gaze so cold it made her shiver. I'll take care of it. The sky outside was overcast when Richard returned to the school. The iron gate slowly opened, the sound of the hinges drawing out like a lament. He walked into the main building, each step weighted with memory. The principal and a few teachers were present in the meeting room. They stood up when they saw him, their faces a mix of anxiety and fear. Richard said nothing, just placed his phone on the table and played the video. The room fell into silence, only the sound of the stainless steel ladle clanging against the tray echoing through the small speaker. When the video stopped, no one could utter a word. The principal stammered. I didn't know, Miss Brooks. Richard cut him off. No need for explanations. I just want to know how many people saw this and kept quiet. No one answered. A teacher near the door lowered his head, his voice so small it was almost inaudible. I once saw her punish Lily. She made the girl kneel in the classroom for not finishing her meal. I was afraid of losing my job, so I didn't dare say anything. The confession was like a spark igniting the air. A few others began to look at each other, their eyes filled with remorse, but Richard didn't care anymore. He picked up his phone, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the room. As he walked down the corridor, the wind blew strongly through the windows. Outside, the schoolyard was empty, the trees swaying violently in the cold wind. He stopped, looking up at the second floor where Madeline once stood, watching the students with her fake empathy. For the first time, he clearly felt the emotion he had only heard others describe. Utter fury. He walked out to the parking lot, opened the car door, but didn't start the engine. Immediately sitting still, he rested his head on the seat, closing his eyes. The sound of the wind outside blended with the frantic pounding in his chest. In that moment, he realized one thing: from now on he wouldn't let anyone, absolutely anyone, hurt his daughter again. He opened his eyes and started the car. The rear-view mirror reflected the school entrance there. Madeline had just walked out, her face deathly pale, her eyes wide as she saw his car stopped by the gate. Richard didn't look at her again. He turned the car around, the wheels slowly rolling on the windswept road. Every time he pressed the accelerator, it was a silent vow that this pain would not fade into silence like before. In the distance, the sky darkened. A light rain began to fall, spreading across the windshield, and amidst those raindrops Lily's face reappeared in his mind, frail but alive. That was enough for him to move forward. The car door closed with a dry thud. Outside, Madeline stood frozen in the schoolyard, her handbag still clutched in her hand. In her panicked eyes, Richard knew she understood that everything was no longer in her control. A few days later, Madeline showed up at the Coleman mansion gate on a gloomy afternoon. Her coat was disheveled. Her heavily powdered face looked sickly pale, and her hands clutching her purse, trembling. When Richard stepped out, she tried to speak calmly. You misunderstood, Richard. Everything at school was just a way to teach children discipline. I didn't mean to harm Lily. He stood still, his eyes devoid of emotion. A long silence passed before he replied, his voice even and cold. I've watched the entire video and listened to all the testimony. Do you have anything else to say? Madeline bit her lip, stepping back slightly but still trying to smile. Do you know I care about the girl? Sometimes you have to be strict enough. Richard cut her off, his gaze freezing her in place. You will leave this house today. When the door closed behind her, the household remained silent. Mrs. Turner took Lily from the sofa up to her room, and Richard called his lawyer. He sent the entire video photos and the cafeteria workers' testimonies to the police. His voice was resolute. I want to file for divorce immediately, and I request a temporary restraining order. She is not to come near my daughter. Within hours, the paperwork was delivered. Madeline had to vacate the mansion that day. When the police arrived, she still pleaded, tears streaming down her face, but Richard stood silently, saying nothing. For the first time, the man who had always been so gentle allowed his rage to surface, not through shouting but through absolute silence. The news spread like wildfire. Most local papers ran headlines like "Teacher accused of mistreating stepdaughter. Millionaire Richard Coleman files for emergency divorce." Social media was flooded with comments. Everyone was outraged, some pitying Lily, others blaming the school, while the media scrambled for answers. Richard refused all interviews. He dedicated all his time to his daughter and worked with his lawyer to finalize the criminal complaint. He had all the school camera footage extracted, saved employee testimonies, and contacted the parents of Lily's classmates. Initially many were hesitant, fearing for their jobs, but when Richard promised, "I will protect you if you dare to speak the truth," one by one they came forward. The official investigation began. The police discovered that Madeline had a history of similar complaints at her previous. The school, once shielded by influential connections, could no longer conceal the truth. Meanwhile, Lily was under the care of a specialized medical team at the hospital. The doctor recommended long-term rest and intensive psychological therapy to rebuild her shattered trust. The first few nights were punctuated by startled awakenings, but her father's constant presence at her bedside slowly calmed her fears, and she would drift back to sleep, finding a measure of peace. Richard remained vigilant, turning his hospital room into a makeshift office. Every glance at his sleeping daughter filled him with a profound sense of guilt and responsibility. The following morning, a newspaper headline screamed Madeline's downfall. A photo of her being escorted from the school emblazoned beneath the words, "Former teacher charged with child maltreatment." Richard felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. He crumpled the paper and tossed it into the trash. The public spectacle was irrelevant. His only concern was to see his daughter smile again. The preliminary hearing took place within weeks. Overwhelming evidence led to Madeline's conviction for child abuse and abuse of authority. A 2-year prison sentence was handed down. In the packed courtroom, her cries of protest, blaming the press and her husband's misunderstanding, went unheard. She was permanently stripped of her teaching license. The school issued a public apology, admitting to serious supervisory lapses. The press hailed Richard as a hero, a steadfast father in an indifferent age, but he ignored the accolades. When his lawyer presented him with an exclusive interview contract, he declined. "I don't need accolades," he stated simply. "I only need my daughter to live in peace." Once Lily was discharged, Richard took decisive steps to simplify their lives. He relinquished control of Coleman Capital to his vice president and declined all collaboration offers. Within days, the vast, echoing mansion was emptied. Mrs. Turner helped Lily pack, the girl selecting only a few cherished items: a box of paints, an old teddy bear, and a drawing her mother had made years ago. When Richard asked where she wanted to go, Lily simply pointed to the window, to the green trees reflected in the distant lake. He understood. He smiled and nodded. That afternoon, the car left the city behind. The road was canopied by trees, the air filled with the scent of damp earth and fresh leaves. Richard drove slowly, his eyes following the dappled sunlight. Lily sat beside him, clutching her teddy bear. She remained silent, but a hint of color had returned to her cheeks. In the rearview mirror, the Coleman Capital headquarters receded against the gray sky, the city fading into a haze of smoke and distant rooftops. Richard gently took his daughter's hand. "We're gonna start over, okay?" Lily nodded, her eyes reflecting the boundless sky ahead. The car continued its journey, carrying 2 wounded souls, a father learning to begin anew and a child learning to trust in love again. The small house nestled among tall pine trees had only 3 rooms and a small garden that led to a wooden dock by the lake. Yet, for Richard, it was the first place he had truly felt at peace since his wife's passing. Mornings began with the gentle sound of the wind whispering across the water and sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, casting a golden glow on the oak dining table. He began relearning the simple things: how to cook, how to make tea, how to prepare breakfast for Lily. At first, his efforts were clumsy. The scrambled eggs were slightly burnt, the toast a bit too dry. But seeing his daughter's soft smile, he felt it was the most perfect breakfast of his life. Although Lily could only manage a few small spoonfuls, Richard knew she was slowly opening up. Mrs. Turner also moved in, becoming more than a housekeeper, a beloved grandmother figure to Lily. She planted new flower beds along the walkway, and every afternoon, the scent of lavender filled the house, breathing life back into the space. Each week, Richard took his daughter to see a therapist in the nearby town. In the initial sessions, Lily sat silently, answering only in brief phrases. But gradually, she began to share stories, talking about her drawings, about the small bird that often landed outside her window. These small changes filled Richard with hope, a realization that healing came not just from the passage of time, but from presence, from being fully there. In the evenings, father and daughter often sat by the window, watching the lake change colors. Richard would read while Lily used watercolors to sketch the scenery. One day, it rained, and she placed her paper outside on the porch to catch a few drops, declaring it to be the true color of the sky. He chuckled, and with that laughter, the old distance vanished. One afternoon, entering her room, Richard saw Lily bent over her desk, a new painting in front of her. On the paper, two people stood side by side under a bright sky, with a small, wobbly inscription beneath, "I'm not afraid anymore." He stood silently, his throat tight with emotion. Without needing to say anything, he knew he had done the right thing. From then on, Richard withdrew completely from the business world. He started a foundation with some old friends to support emotionally traumatized children. They named it Lily's Haven. Whenever the name was mentioned, Lily would smile, her smile as gentle as the wind. The inauguration day took place under a clear sky. Dozens of children held balloons, running around the small yard. Richard held his daughter's hand as they went up to cut the pink ribbon. When the ribbon broke, applause erupted, and Lily looked up, her clear eyes reflecting the bright light. The media wrote many stories about them, calling it a symbol of healing love. But when asked for his thoughts, Richard simply smiled and said, "I'm just doing what a father should have done a long time ago." Their lives unfolded peacefully, yet meaningfully. Each week, several children were brought to the lakeside house for art classes and sharing sessions. Lily often sat with them, guiding them on how to mix colors or paint the sky. In every one of her smiles, Richard saw the image of the girl from years past, but different now, stronger, gentler, and at peace. In the evenings, when the sun set over the lake, children's laughter echoed throughout the garden. Lily ran around the steps, giggling while hugging a new kitten she had adopted. Richard stood by the door, watching the scene quietly, nodding. They both understood they had navigated the darkest days to find their own light, and to bring light to other children. Night descended, and Lily sat in her drawing room. The desk lamp shone down on the still wet paper. On it, she was sketching a small girl reaching toward the sun. The brush strokes were unfinished, but enough to show that the painting was as vibrant and alive as her rekindled belief. Outside, the wind blew softly across the lake, reflecting the moonlight like a silver ribbon. In that small house, Richard sat reading, occasionally looking up to listen to the sound of his daughter's paintbrush. Time went by, and the leaves around the lakeside house changed colors with the seasons. From a girl who feared the school bell and the smell of cold rice, Lily had grown into a mature woman, carrying the gentleness and resilience she had once longed for in adults. She became a licensed psychological counselor, continuing the mission of Lily's Haven, the place that had saved her own childhood. The lakeside house was now the small center of the foundation. Every day, Lily saw dozens of children for therapy. She understood the feeling of being hurt, so she never rushed anyone to speak. Sometimes, she would sit in silence with a child for the entire session, waiting until they were willing to look up. That patience earned her the affectionate title, the listener with a heart. News of Lily spread, and she was invited to attend a national education conference. In the large, brightly lit auditorium, hundreds of teachers, parents, and journalists filled the seats. When the host introduced Miss Lily Coleman, founder of Lily's Haven, a symbol of resilience, the applause was prolonged. Lily stepped onto the stage in a simple white dress. She looked out at the audience, took a deep breath, and began to tell her story. A story no one expected was her own painful memory. She spoke of a little girl who once feared the sound of the school bell, the smell of cold rice in a tray, and most of all, the eyes of the person everyone thought was kind. She spoke of the father who was once too busy to realize his own daughter was slowly fading away in fear. Her voice was steady, not shaking, as if reciting a closed chapter of an old book. The auditorium was quiet. No one dared to interrupt with even a small noise. Every child deserves to be seen with loving eyes, not judgmental ones. she stated. When the sentence rang out, many people bowed their heads. Some were moved to tears. The light shone on her face, illuminating her clear eyes that had once seen darkness but chose to believe in the light. In the back row, Richard sat quietly, his hair significantly grayer, his face marked by time, but his eyes were brighter than ever. He didn't need to speak because just seeing his daughter standing there, he knew all the mistakes of the past had been redeemed, not with money, but with her own resilience. When the ceremony ended, the organizers presented Lily with the Inspiration for Change award. The entire hall gave her a standing ovation. Lily bowed in thanks, the lights shining down, making her smile radiant like the dawn. The media uniformly hailed her as the one who rekindled childhood. But Richard just stood up quietly, applauding while his eyes moistened. He knew that true happiness didn't require applause, just the feeling of seeing his child happy was enough. That evening, father and daughter returned to the lakeside house. The road was still shaded by pines, as always. When the car stopped, Lily opened the door and stepped out. The scent of damp earth mixed with lavender from the old garden rushed out to greet them. They made tea and sat on the porch, watching the tranquil lake reflect the moonlight. The crickets chirped, the soft lapping of the waves against the shore sounding like the breath of time. Lily rested her head on her father's shoulder, and he placed his hand on her hair, his heart filled with the peace he had searched for his entire life. They didn't need to speak, but both understood the past was closed, and the future was opening up with a gentle, enduring light. On the small table near the window, there was an old painting Lily had made as a child. Richard had framed it. A picture of father and daughter holding hands by the lakeside, with a brilliant sun spreading its light across the sky. In the distance, that light, though faded with time, still seemed to emanate the warmth of memory. A gentle breeze blew through, the scent of lavender from the garden mingling with the laughter of a few children playing outside, children Lily hosted for weekend art classes. They ran around the steps, tossing a ball under the moonlight. Richard looked at his daughter, softly smiling, and Lily, catching his eye, just nodded gently. A thank you that needed no words. In the drawing room, the desk lamp still shone on the newspaper. Lily sat by the easel, the brush moving slowly on the paper. The image of a small, brightly lit home gradually emerged, with children laughing on the porch, and in the center, two figures, one tall, one small, sitting looking out at the lake. Richard stood outside the door, watching his daughter in silence. He didn't want to break the moment. A slight breeze blew through, gently stirring the curtain. Lily looked up, saw her father, and smiled. "What are you painting?" "A home," she replied softly, "where everyone feels safe." Richard nodded, stepping in, looking at the unfinished painting. The sun in the drawing radiated golden-orange rays, reflecting on the faces of the two figures in the sketch. He realized this time she wasn't painting a child standing in the light anymore. She was painting herself, the one who had become the light for others. They sat there together until late. Outside, the lake shimmered under the moonlight, reflecting like a mirror. In the small room, the lamp remained warm. No darkness was strong enough to overshadow them. Lily set down her brush, looking at the finished artwork. She whispered, as if to herself, "The light never disappears. Sometimes it just takes time to find it again." Richard looked at his daughter, his eyes full of pride. He placed his hand on her shoulder, gently squeezing. That night, the wind whistled through the pine trees, carrying the lingering scent of lavender. Children's laughter echoed from the porch. In the small lakeside house, the golden light from the drawing room spread everywhere, blending with the moonlight outside, a light of forgiveness, of affection, and of souls who had found their way back to themselves. And that is our bedtime story for today. A journey from shadow to light, from carelessness to affection and healing. Were you moved by the moment Richard truly awakened, or by the final smile of Lily, the girl who was once fearful but who now brings light to others? In your opinion, which character impressed you the most? Richard, the father who dared to confront his mistakes to reclaim his daughter, or Lily, the strong little girl who learned to forgive and heal herself? Please share your thoughts on this story. I would love to know what touched your heart as you listened. Comment below so we can chat more about the beautiful things the story offers before we conclude a long day.